The morning sun cast long shadows across Millbrook's dusty main street when Martha Henderson's scream shattered the peaceful silence. Inside Henderson's general store, the elderly woman stood frozen, staring at the empty display case where her late husband's gold pocket watch had gleamed just hours before. "It's gone!" she cried, her voice echoing through the wooden walls. "Samuel's watch! It's been stolen! Hi, how are you? I'm interrupting quickly just to ask you to click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help a lot. Thank you, and I hope you like the story." Within minutes, half the town had gathered outside the store. Sheriff Tom Bradley pushed through the crowd, his weathered face grim as he examined the broken lock on the display case. The watch wasn't just valuable, it was a symbol of the town's founding, passed down through 3 generations of Hendersons. "Who had access to the store last night?" Bradley asked, pulling out his notebook. Martha wrung her hands. "Only Eddie Murphy was here. He swept the floors and stacked inventory after closing time. I gave him a key weeks ago when I started letting him do odd jobs." All eyes turned to the small figure huddled near the hitching post. Eddie Murphy, barely 14 years old, stood with his thin shoulders hunched, his patched clothes hanging loose on his malnourished frame. The orphaned boy had arrived in Millbrook 6 months ago, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and a story about his parents dying in a wagon accident. "That's him!" shouted Bill Crawford, the town's blacksmith. "I always said we shouldn't trust that vagrant boy. Look at him, guilty as sin." Eddie's face went pale. "I didn't take nothing, Mrs. Henderson. I swear on my parents' graves." But the crowd's mood was turning ugly. Times had been hard in Millbrook, with the railroad bypassing their town and businesses struggling. Petty thefts had increased over the past months, and people were looking for someone to blame. "Search him," demanded Crawford. "Check his pockets." Sheriff Bradley approached Eddie gently. "Son, I need to search you. Just cooperating will help your case." With trembling hands, Eddie turned out his pockets. They contained only a few coins, a piece of string, and a small wooden carving of a horse. Clearly handmade and worthless to anyone but a lonely child. "The watch ain't on him," Bradley announced. "But that doesn't mean he didn't hide it somewhere." "He probably buried it," Crawford yelled. "Or sold it already to some traveling merchant." The crowd pressed closer, their voices rising. Eddie backed against the hitching post, tears streaming down his dirt-stained cheeks. "Please, I didn't do nothing wrong. Mrs. Henderson, you know me. You know I wouldn't—" "I want to believe you, child," Martha said sadly. "But who else could it have been? You were the only one with a key." That's when the crowd parted, and Jacob Loner Cowman stepped forward. At 43, Jacob was a tall, lean man with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. He owned a small ranch outside town and rarely spoke to anyone unless absolutely necessary. Most folks respected him, but kept their distance, knowing he preferred solitude. "I took the watch," Jacob said quietly, his voice cutting through the angry murmur like a knife. The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Sheriff Bradley stared at him. "What did you say, Jacob?" "I said I took Martha's watch." Jacob's voice was steady, but those who knew him could see the tension in his jaw. "Last night, around midnight, I broke the lock and took it." Martha gasped. "Jacob Cowman, why would you do such a thing?" Jacob looked directly at Eddie, then back at the crowd. "I needed the money. My ranch is failing, and I owe money to the bank. I figured I could sell it in the next town over." The accusation hit the townspeople like a thunderbolt. Jacob Cowman, the quiet rancher they'd all respected, a thief? It seemed impossible. Yet here he was, confessing in front of everyone. "Where's the watch now?" Bradley demanded. "Hidden at my ranch. I can take you there." Bill Crawford spat in the dust. "I can't believe it. Jacob Cowman, a common thief, and here we were ready to string up this boy." But Eddie wasn't looking relieved. Instead, he stared at Jacob with confusion and something that might have been recognition. "Mister, why are you—" "Shut up, boy," Jacob said harshly, though his eyes conveyed a different message. "This doesn't concern you anymore." As Sheriff Bradley prepared to escort Jacob to his ranch to retrieve the watch, old Pete Williams, who ran the saloon, scratched his head thoughtfully. "Something don't sit right about this, Tom. Jacob's been coming to my place for years, and he's never been hurting for money. His ranch may be small, but it's profitable." "People can hide their troubles," Bradley replied, though he too seemed puzzled. The crowd began to disperse, their bloodlust satisfied but their confusion evident. Jacob Cowman? A thief? It would be the talk of the town for months. As Jacob was led away, he caught Eddie's eye one more time. The boy was still crying, but now his tears seemed to be for the man who had just sacrificed his reputation to save him. "Thank you," Eddie whispered so quietly only Jacob could hear. Jacob didn't respond, but his step faltered slightly as he walked toward his fate, leaving behind a mystery that would soon unravel in ways no one could imagine. 3 days had passed since Jacob Cowman's shocking confession, and Millbrook buzzed with whispered conversations and sideways glances. The respected rancher sat in the town's small jail cell, awaiting trial, while the community struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the thief he claimed to be. Sheriff Bradley had searched Jacob's ranch thoroughly, but found no trace of the stolen watch. When confronted, Jacob insisted he'd moved it to a safer location and would reveal it only at his trial. This strange behavior only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. Eddie Murphy had tried to visit Jacob twice, but the sheriff had turned him away, saying the prisoner wasn't accepting visitors. The boy spent his days wandering the streets, looking lost and carrying a burden that seemed too heavy for his young shoulders. It was Doc Harrison who first noticed the inconsistencies. As the town's physician and one of its most educated residents, he had a keen eye for details that others missed. "Tom," he said, entering the sheriff's office with a troubled expression, "I've been thinking about Jacob's confession, and something's not adding up." Bradley looked up from his paperwork. "What do you mean, Doc?" "Well, for starters, Jacob claimed he broke the lock around midnight, but I was walking home from the Williamson birth around that time. I passed Henderson's store, and I could swear I saw a light inside much earlier, around 10 o'clock. The sheriff frowned. "Could have been Martha doing late inventory." "That's what I thought, but I asked her yesterday. She said she locked up at 8 and went straight home. Never went back." Bradley set down his pen. "So who was in the store at 10? "That's not all," Doc continued. "I examined the lock yesterday. The break pattern is all wrong for someone Jacob's size and strength. The metal was bent inward and downward, suggesting someone much shorter did the breaking. Someone like Eddie? Or someone else entirely?" Doc pulled out a small piece of paper. "I also found this caught on a splinter near the display case." Bradley examined the fabric. A piece of fine wool, dark blue with a subtle pattern. "This is expensive material. Neither Jacob nor Eddie could afford cloth like this." As if summoned by their conversation, Eddie Murphy appeared in the doorway, his face pale and determined. "Sheriff Bradley, I need to tell you something important. Son, I told you before." "Please," Eddie's voice cracked. "It's about that night. I saw something, but I was scared to say anything because I thought nobody would believe me." Doc Harrison gestured to a chair. "Sit down, boy. Tell us what you saw." Eddie perched on the edge of the chair, his hands trembling. "After I finished cleaning Mrs. Henderson's store, I was walking back to the old barn where I sleep. I heard voices coming from behind the store. Two men arguing." "Did you recognize the voices?" Bradley asked. "One of them, yes, sir. It was Mr. Thornton from the bank." Bradley and Doc exchanged glances. Richard Thornton was one of Millbrook's most prominent citizens, a well-dressed man who'd arrived 2 years ago and quickly established himself as the town's leading banker and financier. "What were they arguing about?" Doc asked gently. "Money, mostly. Mr. Thornton was angry about something, said someone had crossed him for the last time and that he'd make them pay." The other voice was quieter, but he sounded scared. "Did you see who the other man was?" Eddie shook his head. "Too dark, and I was hiding behind the water barrel. But after they left, I saw Mr. Thornton walking toward the front of the store. I thought it was strange, but I was tired and just wanted to sleep." Bradley leaned forward. "Eddie, why didn't you tell us this before?" The boy's eyes filled with tears. "Because Mr. Thornton is important, and I'm nobody. Who would believe a homeless orphan over a banker? I figured you'd just think I was making up stories to get out of trouble." Doc Harrison studied the piece of fabric again. "Tom, Richard Thornton always wears expensive suits, dark blue ones if I recall correctly. We need to talk to Thornton," Bradley said, reaching for his hat. "Wait," Eddie said urgently. "There's something else. Yesterday I saw Mr. Thornton talking to Mrs. Henderson outside the bank. He was holding her hand and speaking real gentle-like, but she looked upset. When I got closer, I heard him say something about helping her through this difficult time and making sure the real criminal pays." The implications hit both men simultaneously. If Thornton was the real thief, his public sympathy for Martha Henderson was a perfect cover, allowing him to appear supportive while ensuring suspicion remained focused elsewhere. "Doc, I want you to take Eddie somewhere safe," Bradley said, standing. "If Thornton realizes the boy can identify him—" "Where are you going?" Doc asked. "To have a conversation with our prominent banker. And then I'm going to ask Jacob Cowman why he's protecting a man who was willing to let a child take the blame for his crime." As they prepared to leave, Eddie grabbed the sheriff's arm. "Mr. Bradley, Mr. Cowman didn't do nothing wrong, did he? He was just trying to protect me." Bradley looked down at the boy's earnest face. "I'm beginning to think Jacob Cowman is a better man than any of us realized, son. And if I'm right, this town owes him one hell of an apology." The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to come together, but the most shocking revelations were yet to come. Sheriff Bradley found Richard Thornton in his office at the Millbrook First Bank, impeccably dressed as always in a dark blue wool suit. The banker looked up from his ledgers with his practiced smile, but Bradley noticed a slight tension around his eyes. "Sheriff Bradley, what brings you here today? I hope there's been progress in the Henderson case. Such a terrible thing for our community." "Indeed it is, Richard. Mind if I sit down? I have some questions about that night." Thornton gestured to a chair, his smile never wavering. "Of course. Anything I can do to help bring that thief to justice." Bradley settled into the chair and pulled out his notebook. "Funny thing about thieves, Richard. Sometimes they're not who you'd expect." He paused, watching Thornton's reaction. "Tell me, where were you the night of the theft?" "At home, naturally. Reading and preparing for the next day's business." "Why do you ask?" "Just being thorough. You know how it is." Bradley leaned back. "We found some interesting evidence at the scene. A piece of fabric caught on the display case. Fine wool, dark blue. Expensive stuff." For just a moment, Thornton's composure slipped. His hand moved unconsciously to his jacket sleeve, where Bradley noticed a small tear in the fabric. "That could belong to anyone," Thornton said carefully. "Many men in town wear blue suits." "True enough, but not many were seen arguing behind Henderson's store that night." The color drained from Thornton's face. "I don't know what you're implying, Sheriff, but—" "I'm not implying anything, Richard. I'm stating facts." Bradley stood up slowly. "Eddie Murphy saw you that night. Heard you arguing with someone about money. Heard you say you'd make them pay. And then he saw you walking toward the front of the store." Thornton's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "That boy is a liar and a thief. You can't trust the word of a vagrant over a respected member of this community." "Funny thing is, Richard, I'm starting to think that vagrant has more honor in his little finger than some respected members have in their whole body." The banker stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is preposterous. I've done nothing but try to help this town prosper. I've given loans to struggling families, invested in local businesses, and skimmed money from those same families and businesses." Bradley interrupted. "I spent the morning going through some records with Doc Harrison. Amazing what you can find when you know what to look for." Thornton's face went ashen. "You have no proof of anything." "Don't I?" Bradley pulled out a folded paper. "This is a copy of the Henderson account. Shows regular deposits from the store's daily earnings. But when I compared it to Martha's own records, there's money missing. Small amounts at first, but getting larger over the past 6 months. That proves nothing. Maybe not by itself. But combined with Eddie's testimony, the fabric evidence, and the fact that you've been pressuring Martha to sell her store to cover debts that don't exist in her books," Bradley shook his head. "It paints a pretty clear picture." Thornton slumped back into his chair, the fight going out of him. "You don't understand. I never meant for it to go this far." "Then explain it to me." For a long moment, Thornton stared at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I made some bad investments back east before I came here. Lost money that wasn't mine to lose. I came to Millbrook to start over, but the people I owed found me. They wanted their money with interest." "So you stole from your own customers?" "Small amounts at first. I told myself I'd pay it back when my investments recovered, but they never did, and the pressure kept mounting." Thornton looked up with desperate eyes. "When I saw that watch in Martha's display case, I knew it would be enough to buy me time, maybe even get them off my back permanently. And you were willing to let a child take the blame." Thornton flinched as if struck. "I never meant for that to happen. I thought no one would notice for days, maybe weeks. I never expected Martha to discover it so quickly, or for suspicion to fall on Eddie. But when it did, you said nothing. I was scared. These men I owe money to, they're not the forgiving type. If I couldn't pay them—" Thornton shuddered. "I convinced myself that Eddie would be fine, that he was young and would recover from a few months in juvenile detention." Bradley felt sick. "A few months? Richard, that boy could have been sent to the state reformatory for years. His life would have been ruined." "I know," Thornton burst out. "Don't you think I know that? It's been eating me alive for 3 days. But then Jacob Cowman confessed, and I thought maybe—" Maybe you could let another innocent man take the blame." Thornton buried his face in his hands. "I'm not a bad man, Sheriff. I just made terrible choices, and each one led to worse ones. Where's the watch, Richard?" "In my safe at home. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Every time I looked at it, I saw that boy's terrified face." Bradley stood up. "Richard Thornton, you're under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. And God help you, because when this town finds out what you've done, I'm not sure I'll be able to protect you from their anger." As Bradley led the broken banker from his office, word spread quickly through Millbrook. The respected financier was the real thief, and Jacob Cowman, the man they'd shunned and condemned, had sacrificed his reputation to protect a frightened child. But the biggest revelation was yet to come, and it would change everything the townspeople thought they knew about justice, sacrifice, and the true meaning of heroism. The crowd that gathered outside the sheriff's office was unlike any Millbrook had seen before. Word of Richard Thornton's arrest had spread like wildfire, and now half the town stood in stunned silence, grappling with the magnitude of their mistake. Sheriff Bradley emerged from the building with Jacob Cowman, who squinted in the afternoon sunlight after 3 days in the dim jail cell. The rancher's clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, but his eyes held no anger, only a quiet dignity that made the crowd's shame even more profound. Martha Henderson pushed through the gathered people, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Jacob, we—" She struggled for words, then simply threw her arms around the startled man. "I'm so sorry. We all are." Bill Crawford, the blacksmith who had been loudest in his condemnation, stepped forward with his hat in his hands. "Jacob, I owe you an apology. We all do. What you did for that boy—" He shook his head. "I don't know if I'd have had the courage." "Where is Eddie?" Jacob asked quietly, his first words since leaving the jail. "Here, Mr. Cowman." Eddie Murphy emerged from behind Doc Harrison, his young face a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "I'm sorry you had to go through all that because of me." Jacob knelt down to the boy's level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Son, you have nothing to apologize for. What happened to you wasn't your fault, and what I did was my choice." "But why?" Eddie's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you let everyone think you were a thief?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "Because I know what it's like to be alone and scared, with no one to stand up for you. I know what it's like when the whole world seems against you." He stood slowly, addressing the crowd. 20 years ago, I was accused of something I didn't do. Cattle rustling, down in Texas. I was young, new to the area, and when some cows went missing, I was the easy target. No family, no friends to vouch for me. The crowd listened in rapt silence as Jacob continued. "I spent 2 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. When I got out, the real thieves had been caught, but it was too late. My reputation was ruined, my life destroyed. I came here to start over, but I never forgot what it felt like to be helpless and alone." Martha Henderson wiped her eyes. "Oh, Jacob." "We had no idea." "I didn't want your pity," Jacob said simply. "I just wanted to live quietly and hurt no one. But when I saw that boy standing there, terrified and friendless, with an angry mob ready to destroy his life," he shrugged. "I couldn't let history repeat itself." Doc Harrison stepped forward. "Jacob, what you did was incredibly brave, but it was also incredibly risky. What if we hadn't discovered the truth?" Then I would have served my time and lived with the knowledge that I'd saved an innocent child from a fate I knew too well. Jacob's voice was steady. Some things are worth the risk. Eddie suddenly broke away from the crowd and ran to Jacob, wrapping his thin arms around the man's waist. "I want to be like you when I grow up," he said fiercely. "I want to be brave enough to help people who can't help themselves." Jacob's composure finally cracked, and he hugged the boy tightly. "You already are brave, son. Braver than you know." Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat. "Folks, there's something else you should know. While we were investigating this case, we discovered that Richard Thornton had been embezzling money from several accounts. The bank examiners are coming tomorrow, but it looks like he stole nearly $3,000 over the past year." Gasps rippled through the crowd. $3,000 was a fortune in their small town. "What happens to the money?" asked Pete Williams. "Most of it's still in Thornton's accounts. It'll be returned to the rightful owners." Bradley paused. "But there's something else. Jacob, tell them about your offer." Jacob looked uncomfortable with the attention. "It's nothing special. I just told the sheriff that if any families are short because of Thornton's theft, I'd cover the difference from my own savings until the bank sorts everything out." The crowd erupted in amazed murmurs. Here was a man they'd condemned as a thief, offering his own money to help the victims of the real criminal. Martha Henderson stepped forward again. "Jacob Cowman, this town owes you more than we can ever repay. Not just for protecting Eddie, but for showing us what real character looks like." "I have an idea," called out Pete Williams. "What if we take up a collection? Help Jacob expand his ranch, maybe hire some help?" "That's not necessary," Jacob began, but the crowd was already voicing enthusiastic agreement. "And Eddie," Martha continued, "I want you to know that you'll always have a job at my store and a place to stay if you need it. You're part of this community now, and we take care of our own." Eddie beamed, but then looked worried. "What about Mr. Thornton? What'll happen to him?" Jacob considered the question seriously. "He'll face justice for what he did, but I hope he'll also find a chance for redemption. Everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing." As the crowd began to disperse, many stopping to shake Jacob's hand or pat Eddie's shoulder, Doc Harrison approached the unlikely pair. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "this whole situation has taught me something important. We were so quick to judge based on appearances and assumptions. A poor orphan boy must be a thief. A respected banker must be honest. A quiet rancher must be hiding something." Jacob nodded. "People see what they expect to see, but sometimes the truth is exactly the opposite of what seems obvious." "Mr. Cowman," Eddie said suddenly, Would you maybe teach me about ranching? I don't have anywhere else to go, and I'd work real hard." Jacob smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in years. "I'd like that, son. I'd like that very much." As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob Cowman and Eddie Murphy walked side by side toward the ranch. Behind them, the town buzzed with conversation about the day's revelations, but ahead of them lay the promise of a new beginning. The story of the stolen watch had ended, but the story of an unlikely family, a man seeking redemption and a boy needing hope, was just beginning. And in a small western town where justice had nearly gone astray, the power of sacrifice and courage had reminded everyone what it truly meant to do the right thing. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't made of gold. They're made of the moments when ordinary people choose to be extraordinary, when the strong protect the weak, and when a community learns that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the courage to stand up for what's right no matter the cost. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much and come back often.